Hello, I am Charlette Stallworth, Vice President of Business Development and Innovation at Stanford Medicine Children's Health. Thank you for joining Innovation 101. This course consists of 3 parts. I will define innovation and its importance in healthcare. We will discuss the fundamentals of technology transfer. I've included a few case studies and opportunities for you to participate, and you can provide your answers by Zoom polling. When the poll has been activated, the question and response options will be shown on your screen. This will be anonymous, so please feel free to participate in these polls as it will lead to a greater discussion. After the didactic session, we will be joined by a panel of clinician innovators, and they will share their experiences in healthcare innovation. We'll conclude with Q&A where our panelists will answer your questions. At the end of this course, you'll be able to define innovation and the key considerations for transforming ideas into products that can improve healthcare. Let's get started. So innovation is more than just a word. It's important to recognize that, and that is a word that's used so many times in so many various ways. And while many definitions exist, the National Science Foundation sums it up well by saying, innovation is a process comprised of a series of steps that begins with imagination and results in the creation of something of value for society. Simply put, innovation provides solutions to the problems we face. History is rich with innovation, including the first pulley crane developed in 6th century BC, later the printing press, which improved communications vastly, and to the drones of the 21st century, and of course, many more. Healthcare is also rich in innovation. Revolutionary innovations describe new technologies, often accompanied by high cost and uncertainty, and create transformational change. Examples include discovery of penicillin, completion of the Human Genome Project, and surgical robots. Evolutionary or incremental innovations, on the other hand, tend to build upon existing technologies and typically have low to moderate costs and offer competitive advantage in the market. An example of incremental innovation would be increasing the shelf life of an existing drug. So why does innovation matter? Why do we care about innovation? As you know, the healthcare industry is facing a lot of changes and challenges, including evolving patient needs, financial constraints, and provider shortages, to name only a few. The people and organizations who view these changes as opportunities rather than threats are most likely to experience success, for which innovation is a key ingredient. Healthcare innovation is not just about doing something new, but also doing something better, which leads to improved care and delivery of care to our patients. So let's take a look at a case study. Dr. X is a pediatric urologist considering the health issue of prolapsed bladder leading to leakage in girls and women. She conceives a device and process for suspending the bladder. Over the weekend, she develops a prototype primarily made of paper clips. So what should she do next? Option A is to call a medical device company to see if they're interested in buying her idea. B, publish the design online and try to crowdsource funding for further development. C, ask her best friend, an engineer, to design and print a 3D prototype. D, contact her organization's technology transfer office for advice. Let's launch the poll. Please select the most appropriate answer. See the answers coming in. So looks like the clear, or the most popular choice, I won't say the clear winner, is answer D, contact the organization's technology transfer office for advice. And I agree, that is what I would advise. There also is an argument to be made for C, to work on a prototype. And so when we talk a little bit more about IP and timing of disclosures and that information, I think it will become more clear why D is the best next step. So technology transfer is the movement of an invention from the inventor to a secondary party for the purpose of further research and development or commercialization. But this could still include the inventor. So the movement itself is not necessarily a handoff. In the context of healthcare, technology transfer can lead to improved patient care, outcomes, future medical discoveries, and economic development. In academic medical centers like Stanford Medicine, innovative ideas are analyzed and developed via a process called technology transfer. It is the movement of an invention from the mind to the market. This process can consist of several phases shown here. The cycle begins when an inventor informs the organization of their idea, which is then evaluated against specific criteria. If the invention meets most of the criteria, then it would be appropriately protected, marketed, and developed and commercialized, typically via license. When a licensee is found that has the capability to take the product to market, a deal will be executed and thereafter actively managed to ensure milestones are met and royalties and other funds are distributed. Now, this is sort of an ideal scenario that I've just described. Most of you know that most inventions don't follow this perfect path. Typically, several steps are repeated, they occur simultaneously, out of order, or not at all. For example, for product development, it's often an iterative process, and many innovation concepts like design thinking, agile software development seek the customer's perspective upfront and often. So in some cases, you could start with product development and then disclose. It's really depends on the technology and sometimes even just where the inventor is when they learn about the next steps in the process. Most academic medical centers and tech companies and pharmaceutical companies have a technology transfer office. Here at Stanford University, it's called the Office of Technology Licensing. Tech transfer offices typically are staffed by professional licensing associates with expertise in their fields and in IP. This office is a primary resource to innovation managers and inventors as it manages the process of evaluating and protecting inventions and advising on development and commercialization. If your role is to encourage, support, and manage innovation, you should develop a close working relationship with your own tech transfer office. In some cases, your in-house innovation team might consist only of an innovation manager and an analyst. And in those cases, most of the functions of the tech transfer office would be outsourced. As you understand the functions and process, you can build a customized framework for supporting innovation and tech transfer at your organization. So recall Dr. X from our case study has decided to disclose her invention. How does she disclose? So she would submit an invention disclosure, which is a confidential document used to capture the invention description, purpose, advantages, stage of development, among other information. In most organizations, the disclosure form is available online. At Stanford Medicine, the Office of Technology Licensing's website includes disclosure forms for employees of the hospitals and the university. So once you do disclose, we ask our staff to submit invention disclosures as early as possible. This helps avoid any inadvertent public disclosures of information, which may jeopardize future ability to obtain legal protection. For example, before you submit a paper for publication, present at a conference, or otherwise share your ideas with outside parties, you should submit an invention disclosure so we can assess whether any intellectual property might exist. In 2013, the US transitioned from a first to invent system to a first to file system by changing a provision in the America Invents Act. And this transition put the US in sync with most other countries. First to file simply means that if two people invent, say, a tricorder, then the person who files first would receive the patent. And this is another reason to disclose early. Using the information provided in the invention disclosure, The Technology Transfer Office evaluates the technology's potential and would consider these questions. Does the invention solve a problem? Is the invention novel or unique? And what stage of development is the invention? During this process, we assess the market size and likely competitors, timeline and cost to get to market, and any potential barriers or challenges. This phase includes meeting with the inventor to learn more about the invention in greater detail. Inventors may provide drawings or prototypes of their technologies that help them express their idea. So let's go back to the case. Dr. X has contacted our technology transfer office and disclosed her invention. The tech transfer office evaluates the invention and advises legal protection as a next step. So what protections are available? You can say that intellectual property are the rights protecting the creations of the mind or human intellect. And there are 4 types of IP listed here. So patent, and there are 3 types of patent, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. Copyright protects authorship, such as writing and art. Trademark for words, symbols to distinguish your company and your goods. Trade secret are information that you want to keep secret that gives you an advantage in the marketplace. That could be like a secret chocolate chip recipe for a cookie company. Other types of protection are non-disclosure agreements, material transfer agreements, data use agreements. Legal protection is not necessarily a prerequisite to commercialization. It really depends on the technology and your goal. Maybe you think the world would be a better place if everyone slept more deeply. So you create a great app that reads bedtime stories to adults to encourage nighttime routine and better sleep. You could post that app to app stores for free download and achieve your goal. On the other hand, if you need investors, you probably want to pursue a patent application. Let's talk a little bit about why. A closer look at patents. So what can be protected? Utility. So utility is a method, an apparatus, a composition of matter. So devices, therapeutics, those would be covered by under utility patents. Plants, it's really the creation of new species of plants, and then designs. So those are what you can protect with a patent. What is required? You must disclose. You can't receive the patent if you don't disclose the invention. The invention must be novel, useful, and non-obvious. And what protection is provided is that it may prevent others from making, using, selling, and offering for sale your invention. And this allows the commercial opportunity. And the duration of the patent, if it's a utility or plant patent, 20 years from filing, or design, 15 years from issue. And the costs vary with each application, typically starting around $5,000 to $15,000. But also, once you start the process, if you're continuing to develop and to maintain the patent protection, their additional costs are incurred throughout the life of the patent. Let's take a look at a different case study. So Dr. H is a physician scientist who conceives a unique RNA model for targeting cancer cells. He has disclosed the invention and a utility patent has been filed. Dr. H recently published a paper discussing the phase 1 trial, which closed with encouraging results. The Technology Transfer Office recommends marketing the technology. So what is the goal of marketing? The goal is to determine how and to whom the technology should be promoted. This includes writing technology summaries, collecting pictures and videos, as well as identifying companies that may have a need for or interest in the product. In Dr. H's case, the Technology Transfer Office or Innovation Manager could seek a company interested in licensing or joint development for the phase 2 trial. Feedback received from companies during the marketing process often helps to guide our future marketing and tech transfer activity. For example, it's not uncommon for a company to conduct an initial assessment of our invention and then ask that we come back to them after the technology is further developed. Once we've developed our marketing plan and materials, we begin pitching the invention to commercial targets. Regardless of who we're engaging, the general marketing process includes sharing non-confidential information. If there is keen interest, you would then execute a non-disclosure agreement and then share confidential information. The marketing process can be one of the longer phases of technology transfer cycle, but if your invention is very specific, say like an incremental improvement on an existing device, then the manufacturer of that existing device might be your one and only marketing target. So let's think of Dr. H. So what is his role in marketing? This is another poll. So let's take a look. Is his role to meet with the innovation manager and suggest pharmaceutical companies that might be interested in joint development? Should he develop the ability to describe the technology in layman's terms? Or C, send a tweet to Elon Musk requesting funding? Or D, no role in marketing. He only wants to publish. Let's launch the poll. See lots of votes coming in. Okay, let's look at the results. So the majority say A, meet with OTL and suggest pharmaceutical companies, and definitely that is a role. And B, develop the ability to describe the technology in layman's terms. This is a really important skill to develop, and that's really important. A few of you want to send that tweet to Elon Musk. Please try to resist from doing that. We don't want to start that too early. Let's see, let's talk about product development. This phase consists of building and improving the technology. This process can involve several different activities, such as fundraising, prototyping, testing, regulatory approvals. For example, as the innovation manager at a small organization, you might hire a local engineering company to build a prototype of a technology. This allows the inventor to review their invention at a tangible state and potentially identify additional design changes that may enhance the technology's value. A prototype might also be used to obtain proof of concept, be incorporated into marketing activities, or be demonstrated or used for demonstration purposes when meeting with prospective investors or partners. The product development phase often occurs concurrently with other steps in the tech transfer process, will be different for each respective technology. Funding may be needed for many reasons, including patent application fees or marketing expenses, prototype design, bench and clinical research, or obtaining proof of concept through product testing. Funding sources include venture capital firms, angel or individual investors, government funding programs, charitable donations, as well as grants and department funds. The type of funding to pursue and odds of securing such funds depend largely on the stage and commercial potential of the invention. Historically, late-stage products with some proven success are more likely to be funded. Also, disruptive tech is appealing to certain venture capital funds. If the technology is being managed externally, such as by a licensee, then the licensee typically will be responsible for fundraising. As medical inventions are developed, regulatory approvals and clearances may be necessary. So let's take a quick look at the regulatory path for devices. The FDA categorizes devices into three classes. Class 1, typically low-risk devices like tongue depressors, while class 3 involve more complex, high-risk technologies like implantable defibrillators. Class 2 falls in the middle. Most class 1 devices are exempt from FDA regulatory clearance. However, these devices still must meet quality and safety standards. Class 2 and 3 devices, on the other hand, must meet specific requirements and approvals before entering the market. The process begins with the manufacturing of a clinical grade device. Once made, the device must be clinically studied to ensure it has the desired effects. Using a new device in a clinical study requires an investigational device exemption, or IDE. IDEs are approved by your Institutional Review Board, IRB, and sometimes also the FDA if the device risk is high. Clinical device studies allow the researcher to gain device safety and efficacy data. If the study is successful, the data gained will be used for 510(k) applications and pre-market approval, also called PMA applications. A 510(k) or PMA is necessary before a device can be marketed for public use. The 510(k)s are typically associated with Class 2 devices, and the PMAs are associated with Class 3 devices. The therapeutic regulatory path is a lot more complex and has longer timeline than that of devices. In order to transition a drug from animal to human subjects, an investigational new drug or IND application must be approved by the FDA. The IND application must include certain safety data, such as the results of animal tests, how the drug is made, what it's made of, a plan for proposed clinical trials, and investigator information, including experience and qualifications. If the drug is successful through clinical trials, then a new drug application or NDA would be filed with the FDA. NDAs must be approved before the drug can be marketed to the public. The information required in an NDA is supposed to tell the drug's whole story, including what happened during clinical trials, how the drug behaves in the body, and how it is manufactured, processed, and packaged. An FDA committee will review the NDA to determine whether the drug should be cleared for public use. The two types of NDA reviews include standard, which takes about 10 months, or priority, which is only about 6 months and is used when a drug would provide a significant treatment improvement. There is high risk in pursuing drug development. Only a very few, maybe 1 out of 10,000 compounds that start on the regulatory path will gain FDA approval. So how far will your institution develop inventions? Let's consider Dr. H again. So what are the options for commercializing his RNA model? Let's take a look. A couple of options listed here. Probably the most common is a license. In this case, the institution or the original owner remains the legal owner of the technology. A grant of certain rights, a license is a grant of certain rights to further the technology based on agreed upon terms. An assignment is another option. This is, I would say, less common, involves the complete transfer of ownership. So if my organization owns the IP, I would execute a contract to transfer that ownership to someone else to develop the technology. Typically for academic medical centers, as the original owner, they will retain the right for non-commercial use to use the technology for educational or research purposes. A strategic alliance is also an option. In this case, you would consider if you are an individual, inventor, or if you belong to an organization, you may partner with an outside organization, a pharmaceutical or device company. This is appropriate when there are complementary ideas and skills, and there is shared risk and shared rewards. Startup, sometimes this idea seems the most appealing, but it's very risky, and few inventions really meet the criteria to launch a startup company. But for a few, there is high potential for high return. And consulting, often tech, device, pharmaceutical companies will engage subject matter experts via consulting agreements and for the development of new technologies. Really should consider the IP rights in those contracts, and if you're an employed physician, understand your responsibilities to disclose and consider conflicts of interest and follow the guidelines of your organization. Once an invention is commercialized, the tech transfer process does not stop. Commercialized technology agreements need to be managed to ensure the terms are met. So, for example, you may want to audit a licensee or at least remain in contact with them to ensure they are actually developing the technology. rather than just sitting on it. Often, in license agreements, you can include terms that require certain milestones to be met, and if not, the technology returns to the original owner. Also, any suspected infringements or disputes will need to be addressed during the term of the commercialized agreement, whatever that agreement was, if it was a license. And you may be concerned about failure to meet deadlines, underpayment of royalties, or failure to receive royalties altogether. Contractual terms might need to be renegotiated as economic conditions change. A change in terms can be requested by either the licensor or licensee, but any new terms proposed would need to be mutually beneficial, otherwise they're unlikely to be accepted. The management of commercialized technologies is performed typically by the Technology Transfer Office or the Innovation Manager. So what's in it for you, the inventor? Once an invention has been commercialized and is successfully generating revenues, royalties will be shared in accordance with your organization's intellectual property policy. Most companies also have similar IP policies. Government agencies typically do not allow revenue sharing for IP created by their employees. But the government also shares innovations with the public, like GPS or Gore-Tex. So for healthcare innovation, especially pediatric healthcare innovation, should first ask, what's in it for the patient? The potential to improve the health of children is strong motivation to pursue innovation, to stick with the tech transfer process through each iteration and rejection. So what is your role as the inventor? The inventor has an important role in the tech transfer process. First and foremost is the submission of a timely and complete invention disclosure. Inventors may also be asked to provide market insight on competitive products, or they may be asked to review IP-related documents such as patent applications and marketing materials. The inventor may also be asked to recommend potential licensees based on your experience in your field, as well as participate in commercialization efforts as appropriate. And last, the Tech Transfer Office and Innovation Manager really appreciate your timely and regular communication throughout the process. Now that we have defined innovation and understand the elements of tech transfer, let's hear from our panel of clinician innovators at Stanford Medicine. And they will discuss their approaches to bringing disruptive and incremental technologies to our patients. After the panel, we will answer your questions. So please place your questions in the Q&A box below. First, we'll hear from Dr. Tom Caruso, followed by nurse innovator Amelia Sperber, then Dr. Kun Sheth, and finally, Dr. Keith Morris. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Charlette. It's a pleasure hearing everything you spoke about just then. And I'm here to talk about innovation in the virtual reality space. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about the program we run and who's all involved, the relationship with OTL, which is our Office of Technology Licensing, the success we've had both internally at the hospital and how we're able to translate that success outside of the hospital. So we started the Stanford Chariot program with a friend and colleague, Dr. Sam Rodriguez, in around 2015, 2016 time period. And some people go into innovation with the sense of, I want to innovate and I want to create this. For us, it was more of an organic process where we decided to improve patient care. And that improvement in patient care came in the form of using projectors that were able to distract children prior to anesthesia. As we grew our program, it got dubbed the Stanford Chariot program. Chariot stands for Childhood Anxiety Reduction through Innovation and Technology. And we scaled out our technologies to include virtual reality, augmented reality, and now mixed reality. In addition to doing distraction-based therapies for children. We also provide education, and we provide innovative therapeutic adjuncts for rehabilitation. As we've grown, we have grown the team. Dr. Ellen Wang is now helps run the program with Dr. Sam Rodriguez as well. We have a clinical manager, Dr. Maria Menendez, and research coordinators, clinical specialists, quite a number of team members who help make this program what it is today. As we were progressing, we thought to ourselves, this software has great utilization in hospitals, not just here, but elsewhere. And there's always that question that some physicians and other innovators come to, like, should I disclose this? Is this an opportunity for me to go out into the real world and leave medicine behind and create a new company? And like Charlette said, startups and the venture capitalist world is wonderful for some, but it does carry a lot of risk. And it doesn't always pan out the way you like it to be. It's sort of like opening a restaurant. You see a lot of restaurants that are successful, but what you don't see are the other 9 of the 10 that did not succeed. We love our jobs as pediatric anesthesiologists, and it was a no-brainer for us to keep our program located within Lucile Packard Children's Hospital underneath the umbrella of Stanford University. We approach our Office of Technology Licensing with what they dub inventions. These inventions are applications, virtual reality, augmented reality, and projector-based applications. And as we disclose them, this provides us some protection regarding who can use them, who can try to say replicate them or reverse engineer them. And it keeps us, I would say, very above board. In other words, as we discover and innovate new therapeutic adjuncts with these innovations, we have no fear of saying to anyone we're hiding anything from Stanford. And that is, for those of you in academics, that's something that you should very much consider, because like it or not, there's a bit of a gray zone between when you're using academic resources and your experiences in academics to innovate a product versus if you're outside of academics and you're kind of in both worlds and you're trying to innovate outside of your academic resources. So this helps us all sleep well at night. Our success within Lucile Packard Hospital has been 100% tied to the just unending support that we've had from the hospital. People like Charlette, who is our executive sponsor. And executive sponsorship is extremely important for any innovators, so that you have a strong tie to hospital leadership, and so they understand what it is you're trying to do and what your vision is. At our hospital, we have about 4,000 to 5,000 use cases of AR, VR, and projector-based technologies a year, making Lucile Packard one of the most innovative immersive tech hospitals in the nation. We're able to do that not just with executive support going in that direction, but also with frontline support. We have very close bonds with our nurse innovators, our child life specialists, and physician partners that we have been allowing us to spread our innovations to about 12 or 13 different departments within the hospital. This growth comes in order to have this sort of growth. In addition to the sponsorship, you need funding. And Charlette went over different sources of funding, and we utilize all these different revenue streams. So number one are grants. Taking your innovation and providing a research aspect of it opens up a whole world of research-based grants. And we applied for and received multiple research-based grants, which provide us the funding to do the studies that support the technology and the care that we're hypothesizing it may improve. The next would be industry. although a lot of venture capitalists and in the private sector, you may look for industry sponsorship. Within academics, you can also seek out industry sponsors. And we've done that, and we've been successful with some companies, not all. You know, you strike out more than you hit, unfortunately, in this world that we're living in. But it doesn't take much with all the other resources that your academic institution provides to be able to take those funds and turn them into something special. And the last would be philanthropic support. We work very closely with the Lucile Packard Children's Hospital Foundation, and using the foundation, and those of you at other hospitals likely have similar foundations, it's important to talk to the foundation about how you're trying to improve patient care and if there are philanthropic avenues to help support that care. The growth of us internally led to many conversations and discussions with other hospitals nationally and internationally. This spread led us to the next question of how do we get these technologies that we've developed within Stanford to other hospitals? Well, like Charlette alluded to, there's a couple different routes. One route is to license this to a distributor. Typical distributors license it from Stanford to distributors. Typical distributors are for-profit. So in the space we're living in, there are some other for-profit distributors out there that distribute immersive technologies to hospital systems. At the end of the day, when we explored the option of a for-profit distributor, we realized that one of our core values at the Stanford Charlette program was that we did not believe finances should be a barrier to access to these technologies. And there were many hospitals and practitioners in these hospitals that said, we would love to have these technologies, but there's no way our hospital is going to pay for them. And I don't blame them. A lot of these technologies are non-reimbursable yet. They will be in the future, I firmly believe. And it's a very tight market out there for hospitals these days. So that led us to develop and found a nonprofit distributor called our nonprofit distributor that I helped found with my colleagues, Dr. Sam Rodriguez, Ellen Wang, Marie Menendez, is called InventorKids. And at InventorKids, we're a nonprofit distributor. And like Charlette mentioned, working very closely with our Office of Technology Licensing, we call them OTL here at Stanford, working very closely at OTL, we're able to execute a license agreement between Stanford and the nonprofit InventorKids. Now, through InventorKids, we can distribute these technologies to hospitals around the nation. And that will provide the opportunity for us to get our technology outside of our area here and into other hospitals without cost being a major barrier for those hospitals. How do you start a nonprofit? Well, I'll tell you, starting nonprofits is actually pretty similar to starting a for-profit company. You have to have a board, you have to have your bylaws, and you need legal help. Within your institution, Office of Technology Licensing provides legal support on the Stanford side of things. To have that distributor bring your technology outside of your institute, you're going to need legal support on that side as well. Typical for-profit distributors will have in-house counsel, or they might contract that out. And at our at InventorKids, we are very, very lucky as a nonprofit to make a very strong tie with a very prominent tech transfer law firm in the nation, and they provide pro bono support for us. It's fortunate for us that law firms do traditionally have a philanthropic side, and if you're able to find pro bono support for your distributor, that's an excellent way to navigate the legal landscape that goes along with it. I'm going to stop there. I see it's 12:10. Stick to my 10 minutes here. And I know that we have some other wonderful panelists to hear from today. So looking forward to hearing from them and talking more with you guys at the end of the panel session.
Thanks so much, Dr. Caruso. That was really compelling. We will now hear from our nurse innovator, Amelia Sperber.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amelia Sperber. I am a neuroscience clinical nurse specialist at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital here at Stanford. For those of you that are not as familiar with the CNS role, it is an advanced practice provider similar to a nurse practitioner, and we focus more on education, research, evidence-based practice, so all the things that tie in directly with innovation. I'm going to speak today a little bit about nursing innovation and how that supports pediatric healthcare. So nursing innovation often stems from challenges that the bedside nurses face working with patients for long, over 12-hour shifts. Many times they have no choice but to get creative in real time. As these trends develop, we often search for more formalized solutions through the use of innovation. Nursing and advanced practice are historically not as encouraged or supported as other disciplines when it comes to innovation, research, and technology. One of the great things about being a nurse or APP with Stanford Children's Health are the unique opportunities to this organization. Some of those opportunities include the Stanford Nurse Alumni Legacy Grant and 2 new programs, which are our research and evidence-based practice fellowships. A common way to define research and innovation, as Charlette mentioned earlier, is that research is typically the use of funding to create knowledge, while innovation uses knowledge to generate funding. Building off of that concept, one thing we often see in the pediatric population, no matter the discipline, is limited evidence to support research and innovation in the pediatric population, mostly due to ethical dilemmas. Based on the hurdles and resources available, my colleagues and I find ourselves adapting existing technology and methods for use in children. I myself recently completed a pilot study on the use of a smartwatch to detect vital sign changes in children experiencing seizures. During my time working as a nurse practitioner in pediatric neurology, a common concern families dealt with was their inability to sleep or have any decent quality of life out of fear that their child would experience a harmful seizure episode. There are many devices on the market right now, but the common complaint that we would hear is that they are unreliable. There are false alarms and alerts all the time, and most often they actually lead to more complications, more stress, and more fear than their purpose. My colleague and I, May Kazaza, were awarded a legacy grant to research whether or not a smartwatch can detect common vital sign changes seen in seizure activity, like hypoxemia and tachycardia. We wanted to compare them to our hospital monitors and see if the values were similar. This device has been FDA approved for heart rate in those 23 and older, as well as EKG. So again, this common theme that while some of this innovation and technology is available for adults, it's not there for pediatrics. So we carried out our pilot study over the course of a year here at Lucille Packard, and we studied 32 patients and collected over 1,000 data points. We did find that as a baseline for detecting heart rate and oxygen saturation, that this smartwatch was both valid and reliable. Our data points were very similar to our pulse ox, our CR monitors. They were, I would say, heart rate was typically within 5 beats per minute, and oxygen saturation was within 2%. So very, very reliable as a baseline monitor. When it came to detecting seizures, it was a little bit more tricky. We did detect heart rate in 85% of the seizures that we captured, and it was very similar and reliable during that time. But the oxygen saturation is brand new technology, and it only captures once every 30 minutes. Obviously cannot predict when a seizure is going to happen. And oftentimes it would not pick up if the patient had any movement. Again, not very useful in a patient experiencing a seizure, particularly a generalized tonic-clonic seizure. We spoke to the manufacturer and had many discussions with them, and the solutions right now are limited. There is an option, a way to make it so that you can capture more with movement, but not more frequently. So that is something that they are working on as a manufacturer. So we do anticipate that as time goes on and technology improves, that our ability to capture these vital sign changes will significantly improve. Our goal at that point is to then develop an application with our academic and physician colleagues so that we can provide a method for families, caregivers to detect seizure activity in their children and hopefully improve quality of life. Other examples of nursing innovation currently in our organization, and we have many, so I'll just name a few, are high fidelity simulations, training and education through interactive videos and lessons. Right now, we are starting some work on the use of a smartphone to measure height of non-ambulatory patients. And we recently completed some work on a light and sound study in our pediatric neurocritical care units, where we installed light and sound meters to help promote the routine of home life, healthy sleep-wake cycles, and reducing delirium. Again, something that is studied often in the adult population, but not in pediatrics. One of the most important elements of innovation, as I spoke about earlier, especially in pediatrics, is the need and importance of supporting the patient and the caregivers, a little bit different than what we see in the adult world. Just to end, I really encourage all of you to work with your nurse and advanced practice provider colleagues, as they often come with a unique and important perspective. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amelia. And to the audience, please remember to enter your questions into the Q&A box. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kun Sheth as our next speaker. Dr. Sheth, we cannot hear you. Let's see. Can you please start again? I'm not sure. There might be an issue. Your mic setting. Let's see, why don't maybe we can work it offline for a second. I could have Keith, Dr. Morris start. Oh, it looks like you're reconnecting. There you are. Dr. Sheth?
Yes.
Yes, there you are. Awesome.
Okay. Sorry about that. So anyways, to introduce myself, I'm a pediatric urologist here at Stanford. I've been here now about 3 years, and my research focus has actually been in biodesign and device development, both before I came here and since I've been here. So I've worked closely with Stanford Biodesign and the Pediatric Device Consortium, which I will chat briefly about as I'm kind of going through some of my experience in innovation. So what I really wanted to drive home today is that, you know, there's a lot of different ways to get involved in innovation. And the key is really realizing that there's collaboration is the fundamental basis. And you have to know, as a clinician, as a nurse practitioner, as from whatever side you're coming in with, you have a unique amount of information to bring to the table, and then working with people in other realms, that's where we really get the right mix and moving forward with innovation. And so one thing I noticed a lot of, and I actually see even now with many of my colleagues from other institutions, that they'll call me saying they have a great idea, but there's a lot of wariness about sharing or IP and keeping the credit for an idea, things like that. And I think that's how a lot of ideas don't make it or don't reach patients. And so early on, the sooner I think that everyone accepts that, the more we can really help patients and get technologies out there. And so I was going to take my time to go over 2 different devices that I've worked on, and just kind of because of the variety and how they've existed both inside and outside of Stanford, to give you guys kind of a good flavor. And so one of these projects actually started back when I was in fellowship, so around 2017, while I was in Houston at Texas Children's, and I worked with a group of engineering students, actually both at Texas A&M and at Rice, through the capstone engineering program, which we have here at Stanford as well. And I came in with a clinical need focused on pediatric patients that have neurogenic bladders that have continuous urinary leakage. And right now, our main form of treatment, if that's the only thing that's going on, is surgical. And surgery is pretty aggressive. It's a bladder neck reconstruction, sometimes placing a sling, but it's a big open surgery for the most part. And the success rate isn't so great. It's like 50 to 60%. And so I thought that ideally there should be a better way to treat this that's less invasive. And I worked with actually 2 different teams, which was interesting to me at first, because I thought, how, if we're all working for the same goal, like why work with 2 different teams? But it's just, they both went down different pathways to solve the same issue, and actually have led to 2 different ideas to date. And essentially, one project from Texas A&M continued with development of a valve really focused on curing the issue of incontinence, and even allowing potentially for catheterization through at the same time. And that progressed to a collaboration with an independent startup company that was already established. Then that's how a lot of our early capstone projects were able to progress with university involvement at Texas Children's or Baylor, and went on to get funding from that perspective. The other side, from Rice, kind of questioned my clinical need, which I think is great, because they were like, well, why are you only trying to solve the problem of leakage? Why not solve the issue altogether of the fact that these patients aren't able to control their bladder, and find a way to give them back that autonomy and let them void on their own accord? And so they developed a urethral pump technology that would be placed inside the bladder, or inside the urethra, every 30 days and exchange out, but then on the press of a button could essentially empty the bladder. This technology, just with, again, like with disclosures and ways things goes, it was actually decided to be was foregoed by the universities. And so these this group of graduate students decided to form a startup. And the first thing that they did was find a full-time CEO who, they continued on. I actually lost touch with them a little bit in the process as I was coming here to Stanford, and they continued evolving and saw that in this patient population, just to add more to just having a pump device, that urinary tract infections was really a big issue with patients with neurogenic bladders. And when you're placing a foreign device, that's already a high risk for infection. And so to address that, they honed in on UTI detection at the same time while having this pump device in place. And so they developed a spectroscopy technology to assist with UTI detection, and added to that AI. And the key was developing an understanding of what's colonization, what's a true urinary tract infection, and what's just baseline bacteria that patients have in the urine all the time. And so around this time, I came back to work with them, and I effectively have continued to work with them as a consultant. And it's interesting because now I'm at Stanford, and this technology has now developed independent of any university. It's fully owned by the company itself. And we did have to have a lot of these conversations with Stanford, with conflict of interest and discussing IP and my involvement and how that plays into the company's technology. Also, as they're growing and they want to test the device, they want clinical sites. And so Stanford now serves as a clinical site for providing urine specimens. The clinical study itself is independent of me, as I'm part of a consultant for the company. And so we have to be very clear with conflicts of interest. But again, there's a lot of back and forth on making sure that IP is clear and that there's no overlap, and the technology is continuing to be developed by the company. And the only provision from Stanford is patient data or patient urine specimens that are being used by this technology. Meanwhile, the research that comes from these patient specimens is publishable by Stanford. And so developing that nuanced back and forth is really important. The other thing with that company itself is that as they, it's constantly iterative, and as they talk to more patients, they found that patients were not as worried about doing intermittent catheterization, and they were more concerned about these urinary tract infections. And they're like, that's great that you have this internal pump device, but this UTI detection, if you can give that to me now, like it'd be even better. And so after working with an accelerator, with the Y Combinator accelerator, and kind of going through all of this information, the company took a little bit of a switch in how we were approaching this and decoupled the two devices. And now we're focusing first on the UTI detection, partly because it's easier to get to the patients that way rather than the process that'll take for regulatory approval for an internalized pump. And by getting this external UTI detection that can be done at home and integrating that with telehealth and constant monitoring for patients while they're at home, it can be come to market much more easily. And from a funding perspective, that can essentially help fund further research and development of the internalized pump. And so there's constantly this change, but the key is going to the patients and the stakeholders that are actually using the device to really see what is needed. And so I think that it's important to embrace the fact that there is going to be a lot of change in innovation, and it's not a steadfast vision where you see something and that's always the end goal. Like this process in and of itself over the last 4 or 5 years now has taught me a lot about just, it started from one clinical need and it's adapted more and more as we've seen how it can affect patients. The other example I wanted to share with you guys is very near and dear to me, and it's a fetal vesicoamniotic shunt that we've developed here at Stanford. And it's for the treatment of lower urinary tract obstruction in patients that currently are treated with these shunts on occasion because of the high morbidity and mortality when they have full obstruction of the bladder, and therefore this affects their amniotic fluid levels and lung development. But the current shunts that are used, they're from the 1980s, and they really haven't been developed more, mainly because the market's small. And so the motivation is much more altruistic. And a lot of, while there's definitely better technology out there, there's just not a financial motivation. And we find this a lot in pediatrics, which is why, as my colleague here mentioned earlier, there's a lot of devices that we use, off-label for kids, or there's not enough evidence for kids, but we still use them, and they're sometimes makeshift solutions. So with the Vortex shunt, we came together here at Stanford. There's a fetal surgeon, Dr. Yer Blumenfeld, myself, a pediatric surgeon that was a fellow here, and then an engineer that's worked closely with Stanford, who essentially has a lab in his garage at this point that we use to develop all the technology and proceed with all the testing. But the difficulty is, as much as this was a great idea initially when we looked for funding, even through Stanford, we found a lot of difficulty with market size, and a lot of the biodesign avenues for funding, they have venture capitalists and they have people that are thinking about market size. And so their initial criticisms were like, this is a great idea, but it's not going to be able to get funding. It's not going to be able to move forward. And we have really adapted a lot and changed and been creative in how to look for financing, how to change this device's potential to I would say, change people's minds about that. And one of them was looking at other avenues for where the device could be used, which one example would be adult pancreatic pseudocysts. And so we've been able to look at alternative markets that increase our market size. And we've also been able to really fine tune our value proposition, because that impact that it can have on long-term healthcare, NICU costs, preterm labor, all of those things are very high. And so giving a full understanding of that is key in pediatric device development, and then also fetal device development. And so it's been an interesting path. We've kept it inside of Stanford, worked closely with OTL, have filed a utility at this point after our original provisional, and are trying to develop this to the point of even an IDE while we're still within the Stanford system, because of the opportunities for funding that we can get for these underserved markets while still within the Stanford umbrella. Eventually, though, we will have to spin out in order to be marketed and be available to patients. And so the right timing of when to spin things out is important. And I wanted to kind of show that with these two examples for you guys.
Thanks so much, Kunj. I really appreciate that. And lastly, we'll hear from Dr. Keith Morse.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charlotte. Hello, my name is Keith Morse. I'm a pediatric hospitalist and medical director for clinical informatics at Stanford's Lucile Packard Children's Hospital. One of my roles as an informaticist is to help bring advanced analytics and digital health innovations into clinical care. Within our IT department, I lead our operational machine learning group that develops and deploys algorithms clinically, and I'm part of our digital health task force that evaluates digital health solutions for potential implementation into our hospitals. In these roles, I listen to a lot of pitch presentations from innovative individuals and companies, and I want to share some key considerations about how we evaluate these offerings. Specifically, I want to focus on your innovation's value proposition, or the argument that you make for how your product will generate more benefit than cost. Often, the pitch presentations that we hear either gloss over their value proposition or present a value proposition that is based on an unrealistic understanding of how healthcare is delivered. The goal here is to offer a few insights that will help you develop a clear and realistic value proposition for why a hospital should adopt your innovation. These points are going to be related to three areas: cost, benefit, and the competition. All right, moving on to cost. So we often talk about the total cost of ownership, and it's important that you as an innovator understand the total cost of ownership of your innovation. A substantial and underappreciated part of the total cost of ownership of any digital health technology is its workflow integration costs. Workflow integration is the organizational effort required to meaningfully include a technology into clinical delivery processes. For example, if you develop an app that optimizes outpatient appointment scheduling with the hope of reducing no-show visits, in order for a health system to really take advantage of your tool, they have to retrain all of their clinic schedulers, all of their front desk staff, and all of their call center support staff. Think about the effort required to develop training materials, set up mandatory training sessions, implement adherence reviews, feedback sessions, follow-up, so many emails, all of this for potentially dozens or hundreds of people. And while digital health software scales nicely across health systems with multiple hospitals, workflow integration costs do not. If you are rolling a tool out to a health system with 15 hospitals, your workflow integration costs are 15x. I cannot overstate how complicated, time-consuming, and expensive this process is, to the extent that it typically dwarfs licensing fees or software integration costs. Now, moving on to benefits. So, how do you justify these costs? How will your innovation benefit the hospital to an extent that it outweighs these costs? It's important that you have a clear description of what your benefits are. But part of the reason that this description is perhaps not the most straightforward is that there's many different types of benefit that innovations can offer. The most obvious one is cash revenue, but there are things like improving high quality care, increasing patient satisfaction, increasing provider satisfaction, supporting regulatory compliance, supporting research. The revenue option is perhaps the most straightforward. If your innovation brings in more money than it costs, that's a relatively easy argument to make. But most digital health innovations don't directly bring in revenue, nor do they have to. Hospitals invest heavily in tools that support organizational goals other than revenue generation, and framing your innovation's benefit towards one of these non-revenue goals is completely reasonable. So as an innovator, your task is not only to figure out what benefit your innovation brings, but you also have to figure out which are the hospitals or health systems that are interested in this benefit. Which hospitals have prioritized the benefit that I am offering? Because while health systems are likely interested in most or all of the areas that I've mentioned earlier, they typically can't do everything all the time. Often there are certain areas that are identified as high priority, and those types of areas are better funded and more likely to be receive investment for improvement. How do you, as somebody outside the hospital, find out what these priorities are? Ask somebody who works in the organization. Typically, these priorities are publicized as initiatives, roadmaps, or 5-year plans. Finally, moving on to the competition. And the competition in this context, what I'm referring to is our electronic health record, or EHR vendor. These are Epic, Cerner, Meditech, many others. The EHR system is the foundational IT system within the hospital, and essentially all meaningful clinical operations go through the EHR. Hospitals have spent millions of dollars implementing, supporting, and training the staff to take advantage of their EHR. As an innovator, your value proposition needs to include a clear articulation of how your innovation relates to the EHR. Are you aiming to have it completely integrated and have your tool accessible via the EHR interface? Or are you positioning yourself to be completely separate and complementary to the EHR? There's certainly no universal right answer to this question, but I would argue that there is a bit of a sweet spot that perhaps can be described as close but not too close. Close in the sense that integration with the EHR is a positive thing. The EHR is, for the most part, the source of truth in clinical care. And so being able to pull out clinical data from the EHR and put it back in where appropriate is immensely valuable. Also, if your integration, or excuse me, if your tool is integrated into the workflow and into the interface of the EHR, your end user is able to access your tool without having to change their workflow, which decreases the workflow integration costs we talked about earlier. Now, close but not too close. The not too close part is in the sense that your innovation needs to offer something that is substantially different from what the EHR vendors offer. And over the last 5 years, this is getting increasingly difficult because of the substantial investment that the major EHR companies are making in advanced analytics and digital health. Convincing, it is a very difficult argument to convince a hospital to invest in a separate company and a separate tool if an analogous tool is available via the familiar and well-supported EHR vendor. Thank you for your attention. I hope these thoughts on workflow integration, benefit prioritization, and EHR compatibility will be helpful in fine-tuning your innovation's value proposition. With that, I'll pass it back to Charlette, and I believe we're moving on to Q&A.
That's right. Thanks so much, Keith. Really a compelling discussion. And now I'd like to have our other panelists turn their videos on, and we will prepare to answer some of the questions in the Q&A box. So we have several questions regarding can those from other institutions or in private practice send their ideas to the Stanford Office of Technology Licensing? And this is a question actually that I posed to OTL about a month ago, because I think this is, there's a need. And at this time, we are not accepting those outside technologies, but definitely can keep you posted. But also there are several companies that help with the technology transfer process. Like I said before, a lot of, if you're in private practice or in a small organization, you may not have the full technology transfer office I mentioned, but we can talk about some other resources that would be available to you. And at the end of this session, I'll put up some contact information so we can continue that discussion offline. So let's see. So Kunj, could you talk a little bit more about the Pediatric Device Consortiums and the FDA's their goal with that? And, I think there's several across the country.
Yes. So the Pediatric Device Consortium is essentially an initiative by the FDA to increase pediatric devices that are approved through regulatory pathway by the FDA. And by increasing the access, they recognize that with small markets, with the costs that are prohibitive, that it's become a bigger issue, and that the number of devices that are approved for peds is far, far lagging behind that for adults. And innovation has always been biased, ultimately at the end, by financial constraints. So the FDA has provided essentially, I think it's now 5 grants that are throughout the country, mainly on the coast and in Texas. There's one here with UCSF and Stanford, 2 on the East Coast, 1 in LA, and then 1 that's the Southwest Pediatric Device Consortium, which is based with Texas and I think Arizona. And they award about, I want to say it's 6-point-something million over a process of 5 years, and then these are renewed. And it allows for funds to be given to varying pediatric focused device companies, and they have to be seeking some level of regulatory approval in the US, be it an adult device that they're trying to turn into a pediatric focused approval, or at least transition to pediatric use. It can also be an international device if they're also pursuing approval in the US. And here specifically at Stanford, we've James Wall, who leads our effort here, has been able to secure other donation funding from the Cottrell Foundation that has actually allowed us to expand our use of the Pediatric Device Consortium funding to both fetal markets and to maternal markets, which is something that the PEDS Device Consortium was focused on, only pediatric patients on a strict, like after from newborn until 18. And so there's a lot of opportunities to come to the PEDS Device Consortium as a presenter, as an innovator, and get feedback and coaching. And then we also have our annual pitch competition where different device companies present to an external panel and can secure funding up to $100,000 for a company.
Thanks so much. Amelia, I see a question here regarding the child seizure activity and the application use. Can you speak a bit to that?
Sure. We actually worked with Apple on this study. So we used their Apple Watches and then their Apple iPhones. So we didn't use an existing application at this point. What we were trying to do was validate the data, make sure that the device was valid, was reliable for detecting these vital signs at baseline and during seizures in children ages 5 and up. Right now, the FDA has only approved heart rate for a medical device for Apple Watch in 23 and up. So a lot of opportunity there for our kiddos, and we saw that it was very reliable as a baseline, but we need to do a lot more work and a lot more research and look at a lot more patients. We only have 32 patients in our pilot study before we can develop an app and take it to the next level. We still need that technology to improve as well, but I'm happy to discuss details and everything offline. I'm not sure if our contact information will be made available, but I'm happy to chat with anyone about our process.
Thanks so much, Amelia. So Keith, I think I see a question here for you about calculating systems workflow integration costs. Is that something you'd like to address?
Yeah, that is a great question, and something that we've written a paper about that offers some sort of parameters to estimate, but at best it is a broad general guess, and there are a couple characteristics of the workflow that perhaps should suggest a higher or lower integration cost. So workflows that are heavily digital typically have lower workflow integration costs. So if you're developing an ML algorithm that supports radiology triage of CT scans, implementing that tool can be largely done in a sort of digital way. So you're mostly affecting computer processes. That is a low implementation cost. On the other hand, if you are developing a tool to support sepsis, which is sort of worsening disease in admitted patients, and you are hoping to change the workflow of all of the nurses, pharmacists, doctors, administrators who are potentially involved in a sepsis response, that is a heavily non-digital workflow. And so you are setting yourself up for substantially higher workflow integration costs. It's something that from the outside, it is very difficult to do because it requires pretty intimate understanding of what the processes are in place. But there are tips to point to sort of the high or the low areas.
Thanks so much. Tom, as we think about augmented reality and virtual reality, it's really cool. And I personally think of like the old Star Trek holodeck, right? Where you're kind of interacting in an environment with a maybe physician. I think one of those series had like a hologram physician. And so I'm just wondering, can you talk about some vision for AR and VR in healthcare?
Sure. I mean, right now it's pretty apparent that there is going to be some integration of AR and VR in healthcare, the same way that tablets and computers and even PDAs, if you remember them, completely disrupted the way we delivered care 20, 30 years ago. What that looks like in the future is still relatively to be determined, but we at Packard are already developing ways in which we can provide remote rehabilitation sessions via virtual reality between both rehabilitation specialists who are at the hospital and patients who are not only not local, but perhaps even away at college. We have one patient who's down in Southern California, and by using VR and interacting in that space, we're able to provide that same care or similar care that they would get here in person. And I think AR and VR, in those technologies integrated with the evolution of the hardware that we use to provide that, will pretty much change the way we see patients. One of our AR simulators actually allows people to do simulations, medical simulations in their own space. So we've done studies where we have participants at home doing medical simulations that are not too dissimilar from those that we currently, the gold standard would be using a freestanding simulation center, which costs millions and millions of dollars. So we're able to lower the entry point to some of these sophisticated technologies, such as medical simulation, by using AR and then facilitating that being done remotely.
Thanks so much. There's a question here. Let's see. How do you navigate innovations IP products for vulnerable groups or manage risk? And that's an interesting question. I think a question that many academic medical centers, including Stanford, are thinking about, and I think have been thinking about for a while and putting into action. So we do consider, our digital innovation and how we can ensure that innovations don't create additional inequities, right? So we're really focused on creating technologies and providing access that allows all people to have access to healthcare. So I think there's some specifics we could talk about maybe at a later date. This person maybe can contact me offline, but this is an important initiative at Stanford Medicine. Another question is, how do we avoid COIs when dealing with companies' products at Stanford? And this says avoid COIs, but really for a conflict of interest, the goal is to disclose and manage in accordance with our compliance rules. And I believe you, Tom, you may have spoken to that, but really being tied in with the regulations and guidelines of the organization and being upfront works very well. So we do manage conflicts of interest and move forward with the innovation.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Charlotte,
Sure,
real
please
quick.
do, Tom.
Conflicts of interest, sometimes they have a bad connotation that goes along with them, and they
Right.
really shouldn't. It's just something that you disclose. And there's a funny story that if you don't have conflicts of interest, then you're not doing anything interesting. So it's okay to have conflicts of interest, and it's a far better world to live in where you fully disclose them and you speak about them candidly and frankly. It rarely will prohibit your growth, and in many cases it actually facilitates it because people feel that they can trust you and you're sort of operating above board, which is always a better place to be.
Thanks so much, Tom. Let's see, can you scroll up a little? Amelia, I see a question regarding the device used to measure ambulatory patients' height. I'm not sure if that's something you've answered offline.
I have not answered that yet. That is work that is just now starting. We had some concerns over accurate weight and height measurements, and so we did a big deep dive at the organization from the nursing leadership side of things. And so that was one of the solutions that came up. A few of the smartphones that are out right now actually have measurement applications. And so our first step would be basically testing those applications and seeing if they are accurate, and then going from there.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Amelia. We're getting close to the end of our time here, and I'm wondering if any of you want to make a few closing remarks.
I'll just say real quick, if anyone's at in a health system, whether it's academic or private, just really consider the advantages to innovating within that ecosystem. You cannot underestimate the street cred you get by doing research and innovating within the patient population, the sponsorship that you'll receive from the executive leaders in your hospital, and how much that'll help give you, I guess I would say, I want to say street cred, like how much that'll help your product advance, actually living and embracing the ecosystem and where you already work. I think that a lot of times the initial first impression is, ooh, I have this great idea, let me take this and run. But then you're going to find yourself on an island. The resources that your hospital and healthcare environment provides you are really fantastic. And I think you should really consider innovating within your space.
Thanks so much, Tom. Amelia, any closing comment?
Thank you, everyone, so much for your time. And it's so wonderful to hear about everyone's work. And again, I know I said this earlier, but I really encourage you all to think about your nurse and advanced practice provider colleagues when you think about innovation and research and technology. They are so, so useful and great team members to have on your side to work with you.
Thanks so much, Amelia. Finch?
I think I just want to again talk about the fact that just again mirror what Tom said, that conflicts of interest are not bad, and it's constantly a process, and there's different resources within Stanford, outside of Stanford, within your university and your ecosystem and outside, and just, it's a very fluid process, and each situation is really different, and finding the right mix for this specific innovation, it's key to just be open-minded as you're looking at all the opportunities.
Thanks so much. Keith?
Thank you all for being here. I would like to emphasize the diversity of arrangements in health systems in this country, in the sense that Stanford is a very different health system from UCSF, which is a very different health system from Sutter, which is very different from Kaiser. All of these are Northern California systems. And so as you seek to find a home for your innovation, there's really no shortcut around talking to people who are on the ground at that organization. They will be able to tell you things that you will never find from the internet, you will never find in published documentation, but it is invaluable to understanding what the organization is like.
Okay. Thanks so much, Keith. And thanks so much, panelists. Really appreciate the statements you've made today and your amazing work in the area of pediatric healthcare innovation. And many thanks to our audience for joining us today. We really appreciate your participation and questions. You see here my contact information, and I'd be happy to share contact information from our panelists with their permission. So just feel free to email me, and I'll make any connections. And again, thanks so much for joining us for Innovation 101. Enjoy the day.